Roger Williams argued forcefully in the mid-17th century for full religious liberty for all people. But the battle for religious liberty is fought on every front and in every generation. During the next few days, we'll see that the religious liberty we enjoy in the United States today resulted from the conviction of a few courageous people, with Baptists leading the way, that the foundation of the new nation was not complete without a wall separating church and state. Ironically, refugees who had fled England because of religious persecution wound up setting up their own versions of established state churches in the American colonies and punishing those who refused to conform. In the Baptist Heritage, Leon Macbeth writes that Baptists in early America were severely whipped, were forced to pay taxes to support the state church, were forcibly deprived of their property, and suffered long stretches in prison, all on account of their Baptist convictions. But Roger Williams' legacy of religious liberty for all people was alive and well in Baptists such as Isaac Backus and John Leland, and non-Baptists such as Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. In 1769, the Warren Baptist Association in Rhode Island created the Grievance Committee, New England's first formal organization aimed at defending religious liberty in the colonies, or, as Macbeth puts it, the first organized religious lobby in America. Yesterday I mentioned that the Warren Baptist Association's Grievance Committee in Rhode Island was the first religious lobby organized in America. The Grievance Committee's job was to gather data on the persecution of Baptists throughout New England, petition courts and legislatures for relief from their judgments, and push for legislation to do away with religious discrimination. In 1772, Isaac Backus, a Massachusetts pastor, was named to lead the committee. Backus spoke and wrote extensively to promote, defend, and publicize Baptist views on religious liberty. In 1773, Backus led Baptists to stop paying taxes to support the state church and to even stop applying for exemption certificates that would exempt them from paying the church taxes, because Backus considered the requirements for the certificates to be religious discrimination and unduly burdensome. For example, having to prove that they regularly attended and supported their own church, that they lived within 5 miles of their church, and that their church was in good standing with its denomination. The Baptist protest boiled down to this: they were being taxed to support churches they didn't attend and whose practices and beliefs they didn't accept. In the Baptist Heritage, Leon Macbeth tells us that Backus' strategy of civil disobedience resulted in more progress toward religious liberty in 1 year than Baptists had achieved in the previous decade. Colonial legislators, some persuaded by Baptist arguments, but others fearing that Baptists would send representatives to London to argue against the colonial governments, began to acquiesce to some of the Baptist demands. Yesterday we saw that civil disobedience by Baptists in 1773, a strategy hatched by Isaac Backus and the Warren Association's Grievance Committee, caused legislatures in New England to begin easing up on laws that punished people on religious grounds. However, as Leon Macbeth tells us in the Baptist Heritage, Backus experienced an occasional setback. In 1780, he was unsuccessful in his attempt to defeat Article 3 of the Massachusetts Constitution, which gave government some jurisdiction over religious affiliation and practice. But he deserves some credit for helping to achieve ratification by the Massachusetts legislature of the federal Constitution in 1789 and, in 1791, the Bill of Rights, which included the First Amendment guarantee of religious freedom. The First Amendment, of course, is a story in itself. The path to securing religious liberty in the new nation was anything but smooth. One who played a key role in moving us down that path was John Leland. Macbeth writes that Leland, a Virginia Baptist minister originally from Massachusetts, became the primary Baptist spokesman in the South for religious liberty. Leland read widely and was one of the best informed Baptist preachers of his day. Though he served briefly as a pastor, Leland spent most of his ministry traveling as an evangelist and as an agitator against state-supported religion and for religious liberty. During Leland's years in Virginia, he preached over 3,000 sermons and baptized over 1,250 people. This week we've looked at the efforts that two Baptist preachers in colonial America, Isaac Backus and John Leland, made on behalf of religious liberty in the United States. Now we turn to two men outside the Baptist fold, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, who also made contributions that were critical to that cause. In 1784, the Virginia legislature was seriously considering a general assessment tax to be imposed on all citizens for the support of religion. It would include a provision permitting taxpayers to designate a specific religious group to receive their funds. However, any tax assessed to support religion, no matter the conditions, violated Baptist conviction that church and state must be separate. So, as Leon Macbeth tells us in the Baptist Heritage, Baptists worked to defeat the assessment even though it would help them financially. But Baptists weren't alone. In 1785, as the legislature continued to consider the bill, James Madison published a statement entitled A Memorial and Remonstrance on the Religious Rights of Man. Madison outlined 15 arguments opposing general assessment and favoring full religious liberty. He insisted that religious matters were properly left solely to the reason and conviction and conscience of every man, and that religion should be wholly exempt from the realm of government. Also in 1785, Thomas Jefferson introduced in the Virginia legislature his bill for establishing religious freedom, which he had originally drafted in 1777. One passage stated that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious beliefs and opinions. Jefferson later cited this bill as one of the three accomplishments for which he most wished to be remembered. For the past few days, we've looked at some key steps taken for the cause of full religious liberty. Yet, despite vigorous debate in the colonial legislatures, the new U.S. Constitution, presented to the states for ratification in 1787, said nothing about religious liberty, which stunned Baptists. Article 6 prohibited the establishment of any religious test for public office, but that was all. In the Baptist Heritage, Leon Macbeth writes that this relative silence about religion was apparently intentional, as John Adams had expressed the hope that Congress would stay out of religious matters altogether. Virginia Baptist General Committee unanimously agreed that the Constitution's failure to guarantee religious liberty was unacceptable. However, a letter written by John Leland on behalf of the committee in 1789 failed to persuade President Washington that explicit guarantees of religious liberty should be added to the Constitution. At this point, even James Madison was unmoved by the committee's concerns. However, Thomas Jefferson wrote from Paris that the people of the United States were entitled to a bill clearly enumerating their rights, especially freedom of religion and freedom of the press, without any language that was vague or designed to confuse. Macbeth tells us that Virginia Baptists objected so strongly to the absence of explicit guarantees of religious liberty that they mounted a campaign to prevent ratification of the Constitution. Had they fled England for the New World for nothing? Had they simply exchanged one government's tyranny for another's? They wouldn't stand for that. At the end of Friday's Baptist brief, discontented Virginia Baptists were campaigning against ratification of the Constitution. In the Baptist Heritage, Leon Macbeth tells us that John Leland wrote a list of 10 Baptist objections to the Constitution, centered around the absence of a Bill of Rights and explicit guarantees of religious liberty, and sent a copy to James Madison. According to Reuben E. Alley's A History of Baptists in Virginia, Leland initially ran against Madison for Virginia representative to the ratifying convention. In March 1788, however, Madison paid Leland a visit at his home. For several hours, the two men discussed the Constitution and Baptist objections to it. By the end of their meeting, they had struck a deal. Leland would withdraw from the race and throw Baptist support to Madison. In return, Madison promised to introduce a constitutional amendment to guarantee full religious liberty for everyone. Upon his election, Madison led Virginia to vote for ratification. In the spring of 1789, shortly after the inauguration of President Washington, Madison introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives 10 proposed amendments known collectively as the Bill of Rights, as Thomas Jefferson had initially proposed in his letter from Paris. After numerous revisions, the first amendment that we have today was adopted. It begins with 2 clauses that guarantee religious liberty: the No Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. These 2 clauses total 16 words. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. James Madison was as good as his word. The new nation was now guaranteed religious liberty, and it almost certainly would not have come about without the convictions and determination of those Virginia Baptists. In wrapping up this series on religious liberty, it's important to note that some Baptists today reject the separation of church and state. For them, religious liberty is based on power rather than principle, a grant from the state rather than a gift from God. In the public schools, for instance, they support compulsory prayer, the teaching of creationism as science, and textbooks based on religious beliefs rather than objective observations and facts. And why shouldn't we expect public institutions in America to promote Christian beliefs? One of the best answers I've read to that question comes from the late T.B. Maston, who taught at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary for 40 years and was a pioneer in the field of Christian ethics. Dr. Maston responded to this question in an article entitled Faith Freely Exercised, which you can find today in the book The Trophy of Baptists, Words to Celebrate Religious Liberty, edited by Brent Walker, Executive Director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Dr. Maston began by quoting Roger Williams' The Bloody Tenet of Persecution. An enforced uniformity of religion throughout a nation or civil state denies that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. Maston went on to write, Jesus coming in the flesh freed men and women to make their own decisions and to then accept responsibility for those decisions. Baptists who support compulsory public school prayer and taxpayer support of private schools, Maston wrote, do not give much attention to the human nature of Jesus and the life he lived. Any coercion toward uniformity violates the basic nature of a person. Christ did not coerce, he only invited. Therefore, the proclamation of the gospel is predicated upon an uncoerced response. Religious freedom to me, he continued, is not a luxury we can afford only when times are good, but it is implicit in the nature of the gospel itself. Dr. Maston concluded with a challenge. Let Baptists beware of pressure to control, particularly of using or supporting coercion for uniformity by political power.